Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker and thank you for watching AHealthcareZ. Today's topic is behavior modification in healthcare. So of course we all know that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting something different. So if we want people's health to be better, if we want healthcare quality to be better, if we want healthcare costs to be lower, then we all need to change our behavior. So specifically, this video is going to talk about behavior modification for members of employer-sponsored health plans, right? So we need look no further than B.J. Fogg. Professor B.J. Fogg is a professor at Stanford University, and he is like the world's expert on behavior modification. And he's got a fantastic behavior modification model that I have seen work in real life. And that behavior modification model is behavior change is the combination of motivation times ability times the trigger. And that all has to happen at the same time. So you have to thread all three needles at the same time. You've got to thread motivation, you've got to thread ability, and you've got to thread the trigger. So if you have people who are motivated and have the ability to change their behavior, but if you don't trigger them, they will not change their behavior. Likewise, if you have people who are motivated and you give them triggers, but it's just too hard, they don't have the ability to do it, you will not change their behavior. Likewise, if you have something that's like really easy and you trigger them, but they have like no motivation whatsoever, then you're not going to change their behavior. And so B.J. Fogg has created this graphic to explain that very clearly. We're going to go through it now. So on the y-axis, you have motivation with low motivation here at the bottom and high motivation there at the top. Now, on the x-axis here, you have ability, with things where people have generally lower ability, and things where you have generally lower ability, it's because they're hard. And over on this side, where you have a lot of people that have an ability to do something, it's generally because it's easy. And then you see this curved line here, which is the action line, which is the combination of motivation and ability that's necessary to have behavior change. So here, when something is hard, then you have to be really motivated in order to change your behavior. So that's why the action curve is up here, and then it curves down, and then here on the action curve, for things that are really easy, well then you only have to have a low amount of motivation in order to do it. Or another way of putting it is that, look, if you have a bunch of people who aren't very motivated, then you better make it really easy in order for them to change their behavior. Aha! That's only 2 out of the 3. The third piece is the triggers. And what he says is that on this side of the action line, triggers work. So in other words, let's say you're here, and it's something that's easy to do, and people have motivation that's above the action line, let's say they've got a medium amount of motivation, not a low amount of motivation, you still need to trigger them, and those triggers will work. However, if you are on this side of the action line, your triggers will fail. Of course, if you're trying to get people to do something that's hard, and they're not motivated, you can trigger them all day long. You can send them emails, you can send them text messages, you can have people sit down with them and counsel them one-on-one. They're not going to change their behavior because it's on the wrong side of the action line. Aha. Let's specifically apply this to a healthcare example. And what a great healthcare example to apply it to of primary care. Traditional primary care is very minimally used by members on an employer-sponsored health plan. I was talking to one employer last month, large construction company in the South. He said that only 15% of their employees had seen a primary care physician in the prior 2 years. That is ridiculously low. And he admitted to it. He's like, listen, this is a huge problem. Likewise, I was talking to another large self-funded employer, about 7,500 employees in Ohio. They had 50% of their employees had seen a primary care physician in the prior 2 years. And they had done all this communication, and they'd done these incentive programs, and yada, yada, yada. And I will tell you that of the employers I talked to, 50% is really on the high side. For most employers, it's about a third. A third of their employees have actually seen a primary care physician in the prior 2 years. Okay, so obviously, and that's another video for another day. In fact, I think I probably even made that video, why primary care is obviously fantastic for keeping people healthy, for identifying and treating chronic diseases, and having people be have their hand held by their primary care physician in terms of referrals to specialists, so they're not trying to navigate their PPO plan on their own, and it ends up making healthcare costs much lower. Having primary care is great. Employers have been trying to get people to primary care for a long time, but it's a behavior change problem. People are not using traditional in-person primary care. Let's examine that from a motivation, ability, and trigger standpoint. So, from a motivation standpoint, it's hard because a lot of people are not motivated about their health because our bodies are so brilliant that we can literally destroy 90% of our kidney function and never know it. We can destroy 90% of our liver function and never even know it. We can have atherosclerosis block 90% of an artery and never know it. So, but of course with screenings and with seeing primary care doctor, blood tests, colonoscopies, mammograms, etc., you can prevent those, or at least identify earlier so it's intervenable, your cancers, your cardiovascular conditions, and you can address a lot of musculoskeletal issues a lot sooner either. And those are the 3 diagnostic categories that drive the majority of high-cost claimants and healthcare costs. So, our bodies are so good, a lot of people just aren't motivated about it, okay? And then lastly, you've got your job that's giving you incentives. And I'm sure many of you are aware that many employees are not engaged in their job just in general. So if they're not engaged with their job, how in the world are they going to be engaged with incentives for their jobs about their health? So, sometimes they work, but oftentimes they fall flat. Okay, next, the ability. Oh God, this is where it becomes super important, right? Because we primary care doctors have made seeing the doctor super difficult, right? Now, of course, we don't intentionally do this, but you gotta take off work, you gotta arrange for childcare, you gotta drive to the office, you gotta battle traffic, you gotta park, you gotta sit in a waiting room, you gotta sit in an exam room, you get maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes with the doctor. I mean, it's literally like a half day off of work. It's like a 3 to 4 hour escapade for 10 to 15 minutes. And so what do people do? They're like, I'm not gonna go. And let's say they identify a chronic disease. And with somebody with bad diabetes, I'd be like, I need to see you monthly. So they're gonna have to take off 12 half days a year. That's 6 days of paid time off. You mean they might only have 2 weeks of vacation. They're not gonna take 6 of their days to see the doctor. There's no way, okay? So the next thing, and then in terms of the triggers, whenever they're trying to communicate to the employees, they send the same stuff to everybody. Like, you mean to tell me that you send some sort of message to a 25-year-old guy and a 45-year-old woman, that same message is gonna resonate the same with you? No, it's totally different. Because the 25-year-old man's healthcare needs are totally different than the 45-year-old woman's healthcare needs. Like, totally different. So you have to message to them completely differently. Okay, so what would success look like? What would you need to do to change behavior around using more primary care? Well, in terms of the motivation, guess who people talk to about their health? They talk to doctors. They don't talk to their job. People don't say, I'm having a problem with my health, I should talk to my job. No, they're like, I'm having a problem with health, I should talk to the doctor. So the motivation around your health, historically, it comes from your doctor, okay? And the ancient Greeks identified this over 2,000 years ago with their framework of ethos, pathos, and logos. If you want to persuade, if you want to motivate somebody, then you have to have credibility, okay? Doctors have credibility when it comes to people's health. Almost everybody saw a pediatrician going up. Like these habits of seeing a doctor have been instilled in people since childhood. So there's credibility within the medical profession for that. Next, pathos. You need to empathize. Pathos is empathizing with the other person. Listen, you need to listen. The physician, one-on-one, or nurse practitioner, physician's assistant, whatever the healthcare professional is, they need to listen and empathize with the individual to understand their particular situation, to understand the social determinants of health or the biopsychosocial model of what's happening to them. Lastly, is the logos. That's the logic of why you need to do things to improve, let's say, your kidney health in terms of treating your diabetes. Okay, notice, the logos and the logic comes last. You have to have the credibility and you have to empathize before you say, well, you really need to take care of your kidneys because you might end up on dialysis, right? If you start with that message, you will fail, okay? You have to do the ethos and the pathos first. Okay, next, the ability. This is where on-site clinics, near-site clinics, direct primary care, and virtual primary care make it so much easier to access primary care. Now, are they perfect solutions? No, I'm not saying they are. But there are gobs of people where their ability, it's too hard and they're not motivated. You have to make the action as easy as possible to be like, look, it's on your cell phone. You can do it in your car. You can do it at home. You can do it while you're on a walk in a park. So if you make it easy, then those people that have lower motivation, they can do it. In order for people with low motivation to do it, you gotta make it super easy. Okay, lastly, you gotta make the triggers personalized. Okay, so you gotta make it customized both in terms of how you communicate to them. So there might be management that are sitting at their desks where emails and text messages make sense. You might have people that need to have hard copy things sent to their homes, like for spousal communications. Like I worked with one health plan, but it was over 60% of their spend was in their spouses. So you can't just communicate with the employees, you got to communicate with the spouses. Okay, now, this is not theoretical. This has already been done. And still, to this day, the best book ever written about employer-sponsored health plans is John Torres' book, The Company That Solved Healthcare. He was the CEO of a manufacturing company called Serigraph in Wisconsin that makes dashboards for cars and trucks. And they kept their healthcare costs flat for almost 10 years. And he wrote a book specifically about how they did it. And going through the motivation, ability, and trigger, they put in incentives, not only monetary incentives for using lower cost services for surgeries or colonoscopies, but they also gave people additional days off for whether it was completing their screenings, etc. So they used a variety, so they absolutely used incentive programs and they did a variety of them. Now, they had an on-site clinic, and I had the fortunate opportunity to actually speak alongside John Torres at a number of conferences. And he would tell me, before the conference, we would talk about, hey John, good to see you again. And he would be like, look, the real key to our success was that clinic. Because it was super easy, because now they had the luxury because they were manufacturing, so everybody was coming into one location. But, so they could all go in and they could use the clinic, and it was super easy. They didn't have to take any time off of work. They just walk right there and it's done. They could do it during their lunch hour. They could do it right before they got to work, right at the end of the work. They could do it super quick. They didn't have to wait in the waiting room right when it was about to be their appointment. They could just go in, bam, it was done. They made it super easy. And he said without that clinic, it would have never been successful. And they did all sorts of other stuff too, but he said the crux was the clinic. Now, many employers do not have the luxury of having all their employees in one geographic location. That's part of the reason why you got to virtualize it. You got people spread out all over the country these days. Now, if you want to get to them, you can't have clinics all over the place. I mean, you can do that if they're concentrated, but if they're not concentrated, you got to virtualize it. Finally, he actually had mandated face-to-face coaching between their health coaches, they had health coaches, and the employees on an annual basis. So in terms of that trigger, it allowed that trigger to be highly customized because the trigger of the coach was literally listening to them and customizing the words that were coming out of their mouth based upon their conversation. Guess what? Conversations are like the key to customization. And he didn't just do that. I mean, they would do in-person meetings, they would do emails, they would do flyers, they would have their HR staff go around, they would have the managers go around. They used so many different channels to communicate. In fact, he's got an entire chapter in his book about the hyper communication that they did at their company. So, healthcare costs flat. I imagine almost every single person watching this video would like to achieve that goal and is probably not achieving that goal today. So, behavior modification, BJ Fogg's behavior modification model is incredibly applicable to healthcare, and I wanted to share it with you today. Thank you for watching AHealthcareZ.